to started to fix the pipe, and then the hole was the pipe was
Closed.
cut.
Morning, everybody. It's just a sound check for those joining in. Just bear with us. We have many people to admit into this meeting, so let's give them opportunity to join in. We will be with you in a few seconds.
Let us keep this one. This one? If our video okay, must see then what is it?
Colleagues, we've just been requested to allow a little bit more time. There are many people still coming into the meeting. So we added another 10 minutes, bear with us. Many people are still coming into the meeting, so we will start in 10 minutes time. Please stay with us. Same time, a little bit audio check for you, just to check if audio is working. Set up that volume, and we will with you. And you can see on the screen, we're counting down the time there. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. It's over to you. Ladies and gents, it seems that we've just lost the signal from that office, but they will reconnect soon, so just bear with us. Thank you.
We on? We on?
Thank you.
Okay. Harry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry about that. Small technological glitch. Welcome to all of those present. I see we have 134 people online. It's excellent to have so much interest in the state of our railways at the moment. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. We have an excellent agenda for the morning. We have I will do my address. We do have a small change to the agenda. Howard Rosen will be talking after my chairman's address, and then we will move on to the Honourable Minister of the Department of Transport, Barbara Creasy, and then after that we will move on to a representative from the Department of Trade and Industry who will be standing in for Honourable Minister Parks Tau. So a really outstanding agenda for the morning, and I think I hope that everybody takes a lot from today. I'll then move on to the ARIA Chairman's address. We did have the closed session of the ARIA AGM this morning, and we had a new board was elected. I have formally retired as the ARIA chairperson, so but my mandate was extended to the end of this morning's session. So I think to begin, for those people that know me, and certainly my family loves to remind me, I am at my roots a boring accountant. So I thought I would share a few numbers that should be critically important to most South Africans. These are 58 billion, 136 billion, 200 billion, and 90 million. 58 billion is, of course, the budget shortfall that the National Treasury is seeking to solve with, amongst others, a further increase in value-added tax. This shows the lack of national fiscal capacity for the large-scale bailout of our railways. 136 billion is the approximate total Transnet debt burden. Much of this debt is in default of its covenants and relies on debt holders' discretion for debt default waivers. This shows the lack of space on the Transnet balance sheet to capitalize the national railway infrastructure. 200 billion is our estimate on what it will take to return the economically viable rail infrastructure in South Africa back into design condition. This itself is a consequence of chronic maintenance underspend that ARIA estimates to be a minimum of 34 billion over the last 12 financial years. 90 million is the national shortfall in freight tonnages, which shortfall has been widely acknowledged to be one of the major bottlenecks to growth in South Africa. GDP growth is what is needed to balance the national fiscus and, most importantly, to create jobs. There are a few certainties which apply to all businesses. The failure of a business that cannot afford to maintain its infrastructure is one of them. And inevitability is only uncertainty is that failure's timing. I said last year that this must be one of the most terrifying and exciting times in the history of South Africa's railways. Terrifying because of the precipitous position the railway industry finds itself in and what it means for our republic. Exciting because of the prospect of what well-considered reforms mean for the potential rebirth of the rail industry and what that means for our republic. These reforms, of course, have set a pathway to bring private sector capital to solve the twin challenges in South Africa's railways of poor quality infrastructure and insufficient train capacity. When government and Transnet do not have the capacity to solve the above problems, these reforms are the only solution. Many gains have been made, and once again, this year, we need to congratulate government on the achievement of the following: the signing into law of the Economic Regulation of Transport Bill, the successful implementation of the interim regulator, the ERC, the release of the final network statement, a formal ratification of the Luxembourg Protocol, the release of requests for information into major private sector participation projects in iron ore, manganese, coal, and intermodal corridors. There is no doubt that significant progress has been made, but by definition, the measure of successful reform is not the release of the network statement or the RFIs. The only real measure of success is, of course, investment. Investment into new trains and investment into railway track infrastructure. Investment at a scale which is economically meaningful. These major concession projects have been released on RFI before RFP. It is our government asking us what we as the private sector need for meaningful investment to happen. It marks a hugely positive departure from the past when projects were scoped in a vacuum and presented on a take it or leave it basis. As the private sector, we must now respond with robust feedback. It is, in my opinion, that if you don't engage in these processes, you lose your right to criticize. But for each year that passes without the achievement of private sector investment, we have to be honest with ourselves that our concerns must grow. Infrastructure, like most assets, do not fail in a linear fashion. Time is not on our side. Having had the privilege to be the ARIA chairperson for the last 5 years, I've sat in a number of private sector industry consultation engagements. What concerns me about our industry is that sometimes we tend toward a narrow focus on ourselves. There seems to be a broad lack of appreciation for the need for systemic cures for the position our industry finds itself in. If success is investment, let us please make our sector more investable. Let us focus on what will enable our industry to survive and thrive, and not where we see our next meal. Let us celebrate government's bold plans and focus our criticism to what is clearly the main thing: how we make the bold plans investable. The price for South Africa is, of course, immense, and the consequences of getting this wrong are severe. Every product that we buy is affected by the logistics system. If the system works well, the cost of transporting goods is cheaper and every consumer benefits. At the same time, efficient logistics networks allow South African products to compete at a global scale. This is what we will achieve through the actions envisaged by the successful rollout of government's reforms. The Freight Logistics Roadmap says that the following about the rail network in South Africa. Many of the efficiency problems in the freight rail network are due to a backlog in infrastructure investments. Transnet has acknowledged the existence of a significant infrastructure investment backlog in rail, but to date has struggled to effectively address it. Insufficient investment in the maintenance and upgrading of network infrastructure has resulted from a number of factors, including weak implementation capability, constraints in the procurement system, and the diversion of resources from maintenance and operating requirements. This has created a vicious cycle, as the lack of investment reduces availability, which in turn reduces revenue and investment. Additional investment, both public and private, must be crowded in order to close the maintenance backlog, especially on priority corridors, which are experiencing security of supply challenges. And I end quote. As an industry, we have spent the last 4 years focusing on policies, regulations, and legislation to chart the way through the gathering storm. Now, our national attention must move to the effective implementation of rail reform. Again, the goal of implementation must be investment at a scale that results in meaningful economic growth. Section 1.5.4 of the Freight Logistics Roadmap says our network should be rationalized. 35% of our network moving 1% of our freight is not sustainable. Network rationalization is now an obvious need and should be implemented. I said this last year, and if it wasn't my last AGM as ARIA chairperson, I think I would say it every year. Our industry has existed worldwide for more than 2 centuries. And for all of that time, the huge capital cost nature of this industry has meant that true success has been founded on doing more with less. To do this, we need real efficiency. But for efficiency, we need high quality infrastructure. I believe we have a tendency in South Africa for grand, complicated plans, signaling systems that cost billions of rands, take years to tender and years to implement, are complicated and taken from the top shelf. The reality on the ground is often suited to far simpler solutions that cost less but suit our needs. Doing more with less should sit in the middle of the heart of all railroaders. Transnet and Prata are now and will, for the foreseeable, a total failure of the nation's railways aside, remain the dominant operators in the country for a decade and more. So with this in mind, consider this example to show the enormous benefits to those entities of reform. Container corridor runs approximately 710 kilometers from City Deep in Gauteng to Bay Head in Durban. It is a double line each way and was specified for 72 slots in each direction each day. The targeted 18-hour transit time is based on the signaling solution that was designed in the 1970s and implemented in the 1980s. The reality today, due to the well-documented challenges of setting our railways, is that trains transit somewhere between 2 and 3 days. Including loading and offloading times, my estimate is that the maximum journeys each train set could complete in a month is 10. Post the PSP investment project that stems from the RFI process launched last week, with the infrastructure returned to design condition and the introduction of a modern signaling solution and a modern network operating system, train transit times can be compressed to less than 12 hours. It is conceivable the trains could complete 2 trips in 24 hours. The number of monthly completed journeys should grow to 40 to 50. That is an increase in revenue to Transnet per train set of 400% to 500%. These PSP projects represent a massive opportunity to the largest rolling stock owners and operators in a world where efficiency and more with less is fundamental. Implemented right, they can chart the path for Transnet's long-term sustainability. The year ended March 2025 was another good year for the association under the stewardship of Marcelo and Klapo. The highlights include the advancement of rail reform and the support of members in supplying robust commentary to the network statement as part of the public participation process, and the support of government in the adoption of the Luxembourg Protocol to the Cape Town Convention on International Interests. A small amendment to our laws that will have a meaningful impact on the cost of rolling stock finance, a vital intervention in the context of our times when about 75 billion rand is needed of new trains for South Africa. In my 5 years, in this role, Marcelo has stood as a bright beacon, willing to talk to power. It is hard for me to explain adequately the bravery this took. She has been the brunt of criticism, name calling, and even threats to her safety. Marcelo, there were times when I was in awe of you and how you were willing to soldier on despite these threats. I have no doubt the progress in setting a path to systemic recovery through rail reform would not have advanced as far as it has if it were not for your support of government and if you had not shone a bright light on the challenges our industry was facing when all others were unwilling to do so. But despite all that and the challenges that were going on, and perhaps most importantly, we had fun while doing it. Thank you, Marcelo. I'm going to miss the fun. I would like to thank the board, Ruth Makobe, Nwabisa and Tiani, Frieden and Ndlovu and Tamigwala, and before you, Gert Beer, Reg Taylor and Leon Boyens for your incredible support. Throughout this time, the DTIC has also been a strong pillar of support for the association through funding and active engagement. For that, I would like to thank Lungi Powa Rabalani, Ramu Kuvati, and Nyambeni Nemadotsi. Your dedication is to make the sector stronger. And for that, I salute you. Latterly, we've also welcomed Transnet to the board, and it's been a pleasure to work closely with Transnet too. I would like to close by urging ARIA in future to keep its eye on the systemic recovery of our railways for the benefit of our economy and not on short-term or narrow interests that undermine this goal. There's nothing that I can see which is more important right now than a growing economy, and rail reform is central to that. With that, Harry, I would like to please move on to introducing a very good friend of ARIA, Howard Rosen. Howard is the chairperson of the Rail Working Group, which is a non-profit organization which is advocating for the implementation of the Luxembourg Protocol. We have had some giant leaps forward in South Africa over the last 12 months with a formal ratification of the Luxembourg Protocol. If I recall right, we are the 6th country in the world to formally ratify the protocol. So we really are leaders in this and the first in Africa. It has significant benefits, of course, for rolling stock finance, and I would like to hand over to Howard to take us through his presentation. Howard will talk for about 15 minutes, and then Minister Creasy will be joining us at about 10 to 12.
Jamie, thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to take part in your event today. I think I need to share the screen, so hopefully I have the right to do that, if I can.
Yes, you have.
Great. And hopefully then you can see what I have on the screen. Yeah.
Almost there.
That looks
Yes.
hopeful. That
Perfect.
looks hopeful. Very good. Okay. Technology sometimes works. You never know. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I do really think of you all as friends because Jamie, Marcella, and many others around the table, both literally and metaphorically, have been great colleagues and friends over the years. And of course, we will end up talking somewhere about the Luxembourg Rail Protocol, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for all of your wonderful support and friendship, which must continue. Of course, we've got more work to do. And it's a great privilege to be able to talk to you today at your annual meeting. And I wanted to give you something different to think about. Not necessarily that the conclusion is different, but that we look at things sometimes only in one way, and I thought it would be useful and interesting to actually look at something in a slightly different way. So the picture you see in front of you is an interesting picture. I asked, and it was actually Copilot, but I asked artificial intelligence to design me a slide indicating trust in the railways. And you can see it came up with a number of pictures. This was the best one. And what's so interesting is how imperfect it is. So trust, but it's not perfect trust. So look at some of the problems with this, with the graphic. For example, you've got that middle train doesn't seem to have any tracks. There's a guy sitting on the top of the train. What is he doing sitting on the top of the train? There's a gap between the platform and the train in the foreground. Really quite bizarre. And yet every time I tried to create a different image, it always came up with flaws, which should give us some comfort about the fact that artificial intelligence is not supreme and can design a solution to every problem, but also should worry us a little bit as well. Notwithstanding that, we've got an image there of how things should work well in the railways in Africa. But the question I want to address, therefore, is what do we mean by trust in the railways? Why is it important, and what do we need to do to ensure that that trust works? And one of the I hope I can move these slides on. Yeah. What I then asked the AI to tell me, provided a picture of, was how would you visualize mistrust in the railways? And it came up with this unbelievably dystopic picture, which is quite troubling, actually, and again, not a perfect picture in any sense of the word, but it's how it's visualized, that lack of trust, and what it is saying to us is that trust is important as part of the way the railways work, and what we find ourselves in the industry is, if you like, between trust and mistrust. Of course, we would like to trust everything that goes on, do everything by a shake of a hand, but the reality is you can't do that. And the reality is that within the industry, we have to recognize that there are boundaries as to where that trust is, and how does that? How do you deal with that? How do you combat that? Now, let's just look at what an operator must trust. There's a lot of things he's got to trust, actually. It's a lot of the times we take this for granted, but nonetheless, there's a huge level of trust within the railway industry. And I'm sure this list is not exclusive. I'm sure you could add to this list. But look at all the different areas that a classic operator has to worry about. Whether the infrastructure is secure, the rolling stock is manufactured correctly, it's operating correctly, the operations and the operating crew is competent, the equipment is not dangerous in any way, is not going to cause any damage to passengers, that he can finance that equipment. And in South Africa now, that's obviously becoming a bigger and bigger issue, even for the state-owned enterprises, where they will need to look for third-party finance and find finance at a rate which is acceptable, which is financially sustainable. And also, the government can't interfere. And that's not criticizing government, but basically the business community just wants to get on with the job and doesn't want strong interference, particularly with creditor rights. And yes, we would like to do this by a shake of the hand. And in some cases, in the past, that has been the case. But honestly, today, it's not realistic. We need to have a contractual structure that will regulate the way that these relationships work, that the relationship between the operator and the customer, the operator and the manufacturer, the creditor, and so on, how that actually works. You just can't do it through a shake of hand. Apart from anything else, you don't have enough detail. You need a contract. But you also need to have a legal framework around that contract. It's no good having a contract if there's no law to support that contract, if there's no enforcement system to enforce the rights that accrue under that contract. So this is not something we should take for granted. And certainly a legal framework is an essential element of the way that the railway industry has to work. It should not be suffocating. It should not stop us doing our business. But on the other hand, we rely on that to support the way that the industry works. But let's look at it from the point of view of a financier. He's also got a lot of worries. He's worrying about the operator, whether the operator is solvent. What about the equipment? Is it working correctly? How does he identify his collateral, even if he's taking security over assets? He probably has to take capital reserves in one way or another against the credit he's now giving out, whether he's providing lease finance or secured debt, or even unsecured debt, even worse. In many cases, he needs to look at whether he's able to get export credit agency support, particularly if the equipment is coming in from another country. the manufacturing entity is able to bring in credit support from a third party, which obviously then makes the financing cheaper. He's worried, of course, about operator default and this solvency of the operator. We talked about that before. What are his rights if there is an operator default or insolvency? And of course, he must be protected against third-party rights, especially if the rolling stock is moving across a border. And one of the great things about the SADC area is, with the exception of Gautrain, all the rolling stock can run on the same gauge. So we have this dream ahead of us that we can move rolling stock seamlessly around the SADC area. But only if the legal protections are there, because a financier who's providing the funding for the rolling stock, he has to have contractual protection, and he needs legal protections. And particularly when you're looking across borders, you need a cross-border framework as to how to deal with that. So one of the big steps forward we've made over the last few months is the South African ratification of the Luxembourg Rail Protocol. As you probably know, they ratified at the end of January. It took time to get it over the line, but we did. It now needs to be incorporated into national law, and I know that that's being worked on at the moment. But this is a huge step forward. It creates that legal framework that we need, firstly, in terms of attracting in investment into the South African space, allowing rolling stock to move seamlessly around the system, not just in South Africa, but beyond. Obviously, we need other states to ratify the protocol as well, but South Africa's taken the lead. And as Jamie mentioned before, that's an important lead. It's a groundbreaker certainly in Southern Africa. And we know that there are other countries that are working on following that example. So I'm very confident that we will see a number of other countries around South Africa quite quickly adopting the protocol, making that global framework apply within the Southern African space. So we obviously do need to have that framework, but we now have that, and we should be able to use it. This was a picture. My Russian is not that good, but this is a picture of the negotiations that took place in the 1970s. Between Ronald Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev when they were negotiating reduction in nuclear arms. This is quite a famous picture, which some of you may have seen. And the wording on the right-hand side, Dobreviai no proverviai, is a very famous Russian proverb that Ronald Reagan used in the negotiations. In English, it means trust but verify. And it's been used in many cases in the intervening years by American negotiators oftentimes, although it's a Russian proverb. The Luxembourg Protocol is so important for us in South Africa because it creates that verification system. And I'm not going to go through the whole slide. Our time is limited, but you can read all the different benefits that the protocol is going to bring to the industry. But most importantly, it's bringing those benefits to the industry because it's creating that framework. It's creating that national and international framework for financiers to be able to finance rolling stock with comfort, with security, that they have the trust, they have the trust in the counterparties they're working with, but they also have the verification system. They also have the ability to ensure that when rolling stock moves across borders, they know that their system will apply. They know that their title rights will still be protected. They know that a unique identification system, which is brought in by the protocol, will make it much easier to track the rolling stock. And indeed, the Rail Working Group is doing a lot of work with the UN at the moment on enhancing the whole unique identification system, moving them onto digital platforms. So there's a very positive future out there, but it's being is being secured, if you like, by that legal framework that allows the creditors to actually verify what's going on. Yes, they have trust in their customers. Hopefully they don't enter into agreements if they don't have trust in the first place, but it gives them the framework. It allows them to judge what their rights are, and then if necessary, hopefully not, but if necessary, enforce those rights when things go wrong. I don't know how well you can read that on the screen, and I'm sure you'll see the slides afterwards, but this just gives you a sense of the ecosystem of what the Luxembourg Rail Protocol has introduced. And it's fascinating. We're breaking new ground here. There is no other treaty like this that relates to the railway industry. As far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but South Africa hasn't signed any other global rail treaties or ratified any global rail treaties in the past. So this is a very important step forward and a new step forward for the industry. And we need to get used to that ecosystem. I'll actually be running a workshop on this in May in Johannesburg, but you can see the different players and how the protocol creates that framework, creates that security system, creates that ability for creditors to verify where they go. So in conclusion, yes, we must trust. We can't do business without trust. And the railways have to work with a trust system. But trust is not enough. You need a contractual structure, and then you need a statutory structure behind that, which actually creates the underpinning of the way that finance will work in the future, and the railways will work in the future. Benign legislation, not suffocating legislation, is actually very important for the railway industry. It needs it. And now with the Luxembourg Rail Protocol being in force, applying in South Africa, we see this as an essential precondition for the way that the rail sector, not just in South Africa, in Southern Africa, will develop in the future, because we can trust and we can verify. Thank you.
Howard, thank you very much for that. Howard, just one, a quick question, which I think would be really good for everybody to understand. In South Africa, we have a relatively high base interest rate. And in the world of a very capital-intensive industry, when we have to raise, one 100-wagon train, for example, is a 600 million rand investment. The country needs circa 75 billion rands worth of locomotives and wagons in order to service the 90 million ton freight shortfall. Can you give us a sense of what you believe the interest rate benefit should be from the country implementing the protocol? Because, rands and cents at the end of the day is the most important thing. And if we can get a benefit in terms of interest rate and even tenor of debt, what that means to unlocking investments in South Africa, which is the most important thing, really, is critical.
Okay. Obviously, critical question. First thing to say is that you have to look at things from the perspective of the finance community. There is a direct correlation between the cost of credit and security. The more secure the lending is, the lower the cost of credit. And that's not just because a creditor, a bank, let's say, thinks, well, I feel more comfortable today and therefore I can reduce my charges. It's much more organized than that. Banks around the world are subject to the Bank for International Settlements rules on the way that they prudentially account for credit that they provide. So the higher the risk, the more capital they have to allocate against that risk. The lower the risk, the less capital. That capital costs some money, which means that the bank's cost of funds starts going down when they have more security. Now, what the protocol does, and why it's so fascinating, is that for the first time, it opens up the scenario for banks to engage in what we call object-based lending. In other words, they're no longer looking just at the credit of the customer. They're looking at the asset. And for the first time, it gives them security in that asset. So that means that, in a way, the answer to the question is very difficult because it depends on the creditworthiness of the borrower or the lessee, of course, as well. But the fact that you've got security in the asset as well gives an additional benefit to the creditor, which then should be reflected into the financing rates because his cost of funds has gone down, and the way that he accounts internally for that risk has changed. Now, over and above that, particularly when you're talking about new equipment, you often have export credit agencies. It might be ECIC in South Africa if equipment's going outside of South Africa, or equipment coming into South Africa maybe it has support from export credit agencies outside of South Africa. They will provide credit support on financing. We're in the middle of a debate, a campaign, negotiations. Don't quite know how to describe it, but we're pushing the export credit agencies, including very respectfully ECIC, to get them to introduce a Cape Town discount, which is what is going on the aircraft side. So export credit agencies under the OECD are offering to reduce their risk premiums by 10% if the aircraft protocol to the Cape Town Convention applies. And we're saying to all the ECAs now, and we're pressing them very hard, protocols now in force. It would be crazy, bearing in mind your commitment, dear ECAs, to sustainable finance, to sustainable projects, with railways being so much more environmentally friendly and socially and economically beneficial to the community. It would be crazy if you gave a reduction of 10% on your risk premiums for aircraft when the aircraft protocol to the Cape Town Convention applies, but you don't do that when the rail protocol applies. And I was in Paris 10 days ago arguing this with the ECAs in the OECD. They get it. They understand the argument that we're making. I think they feel quite embarrassed about what the current position is. And I think that is going to change. But we need to push. And we all need to push as an industry, as a finance community. And hopefully we can move that whole scenario forward. And that will make a significant difference to the financing rates when ECA funding comes in. I can go into more detail, but I won't. Time is limited. The other thing to bear in mind is that when you, going back to the presentation, when you have a global framework, when you have a set of rules that apply regardless of where the equipment is, that means two things. Firstly, your documentation can be much more standardized. Because you're dealing with the same issues and you've got the same protections. So it's bad news for the lawyers. I'm sorry about this. I'm a lawyer, so okay, I can take it. But it's bad news for the lawyers because the documentation can be more regularized. It can import in the protections from the treaty, and you can use the same rules basically wherever you are. So whether you're financing rolling stock in Zimbabwe or in South Africa or Eswatini or Namibia and so on, providing they've all ratified the protocol, you can basically use the same system. And in some cases, people have been using single purpose companies and so on. These all cost money. Those can go out the window. The second thing is that if you're an external investor, let's say you're a financier based in New York or in London, you look for recognition, you look for points of recognition. If you understand the system, you understand how the security system works, you're much more inclined to put money, to invest money into that particular community, to bring more capital into that environment, and to bring that money in at a reasonable rate. So you have more supply of credit into the market, which of course then pushes the price down. So there are various different microeconomic reasons why that cost of funding should go down. Obviously, the protocol itself brings lots of macroeconomic benefits, which sadly oftentimes are not quantified.
Howard, thanks very much. And you know, when you think about it in the South African context, when we require about 75 billion rand of locomotives and wagons, and when you're raising in our world, you're required to raise long-dated debt, sort of circa 10-year debt. A 10% discount on your funding across 75 billion rand across interest across 10 years is really, we're talking about massive, significant benefits before you get to the investability that you've raised. So Howard, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. It's great to see you. Congratulations on the success in South Africa with the progression. And of course, congratulations to the South African government for being one of the leaders worldwide for the implementation of this very important Luxembourg Protocol. So thank you.
Pleasure. Pleasure to be with you.
Harry, if we can then move on to our keynote address, if I could please introduce the Honourable Minister of Transport, Barbara Creecy. Barbara Creecy is a former anti-apartheid activist who has been the Minister of Transport since July 2024. She was formerly the Minister of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries between 2019 and 2024. Between 1994 and 2019, she served continuously on the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, and she was a member of the Gauteng Executive Council from 2004 to 2019. Serving as a member of the Executive Council for Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture from 2004 to 2009, for Education 2009 to 2014, and for Finance from 2014 to 2019. She joined the National Assembly of South Africa in the May 2019 general election, and thereafter was appointed to the Cabinet by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The Honourable Minister has a reputation of being technically astute with a strong grasp of both the challenges our industry faces and the potential solutions thereto. We thank you, Minister, for your time to talk to the railway industry today. As ARIA, we would like to strongly affirm our support for the rail reform process that your ministry has crafted, and we pledge our support for the successful implementation of reform. Honourable Minister, thank you, and if I can hand over to you, thank you.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and allow me to acknowledge the Board of Directors of the African Rail Association, members of industry from South Africa and SADC, as well as the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to address your annual general meeting today. And I think many of you would know that inclusive and sustainable economic growth is the apex priority of our 7th administration. And we understand that in order to achieve this apex priority, our logistics sector must be providing an effective system of transportation for people and goods. And it's no secret that in recent times, this has not been happening, and has led to delays in terms of the movement of commodities. It has also resulted in a great deal of freight decanting onto our road network and attendant problems of road accidents and destruction of road infrastructure. Now, I think that what I want to share with you today is that to fix this situation, our government is embarked on a process of reform of our rail system. And in 2022, Cabinet approved the National Rail Policy, which provides certainty and a uniform approach in the management of the rail transport industry. And it aims to reposition rail as the backbone of transport for people and goods. It also talks about setting up a fair and transparent economic regulation system to enable third-party participation and third-party access to the rail sector. And in 2023, in December, Cabinet passed the Freight Logistics Roadmap that lays out the process of transformation that Transnet itself must undergo, and also the processes for establishing the economic regulator and setting in place third-party access for the rail infrastructure system. So we have already established the interim economic regulator, and this economic regulator is already guiding the implementation of third-party access to the rail sector, ensuring regulatory certainty and fair risk allocation. And it also includes frameworks for network access, tariff methodology, service levels, and a contractual frame.
Yes.
Maybe, Chair, we should ask, there's somebody.
Sorted already, Minister.
Thank you. In December last year and in January this year, we implemented the network statement and rail access tariffs. And we know that your association, together with broad stakeholders, have already given us feedback on the network statement and the new tariff framework that we will be implementing for the current financial year. In the State of the Nation address, President Cyril Ramaphosa noted that open access to the rail network will allow train operating companies to increase the volume of goods transported by rail, while our network infrastructure remains state-owned. This will ensure that South African minerals, vehicles, and agricultural produce reach international markets, securing jobs and earning much-needed revenue for our fiscus. I think what we know is that since the very serious crisis that we faced in 2022-2023 in the freight sector, Transnet has, from July last year, set up a war room. They've managed through this war room to increase the amount of freight that is being transported on the logistics network from 149 million tons. We're hoping by the end of this financial year, we'll be somewhere 164 million tons. But what we know is that the appetite is at 250 million tons of freight per annum and beyond that. And the intention of the network statement is to create a situation where third-party operators could be providing rolling stock and providing services that would meet the difference between 160, 170 million tons per annum and 250 million tons per annum. But those operators have already raised the point that in this regard, they will be operating on infrastructure that is badly in need of renovation. And we know that not only is the infrastructure, the actual rails themselves, in many instances in a bad state, we also have problems with signaling, and we also have problems with cabling. And so on Sunday last week, I made an announcement that we are opening a request for information of those who would be interested in participating in private sector participation on our key freight corridors. And those key freight corridors include the Northern Cape to Saldanha Bay bulk minerals corridor, primarily for iron ore and manganese exports, and the Northern Cape to Nelson Mandela Bay corridor, primarily for manganese exports. Limpopo and Mpumalanga to Richards Bay bulk minerals corridor, with projects that would be related to coal, chrome, and magnetite exports. And then intermodal supply chain PSP projects focused on the container and automotive sectors, including the potential designation of the South African container port system as a regional transshipment hub for major shipping lines. Now, this is a major step forward, because what this step forward does is it invites the private sector to help guide us in a process that Transnet will be engaging in August this year to put out requests for proposals. And essentially what we're opening up the possibility for is investment in the rail network itself, and not just investment in terms of being a freight transportation provider. Now, it's very important to say that this process is guided by certain principles. So the first principle is that we would make sure that the rail network remains state-owned. So there could be a possibility that we could agree to concessioning out part of the network, but at the end of the concession period, the aim would be for the network to revert to the state. And I think that the reason that we're doing this is because we have an opportunity as a latecomer to rail reform to understand that processes of rail reform in other domains have not always been as effective as might originally have been envisaged. And one of the consequences of reform in other domains has been a balkanization of the network. So you find a situation where they're competing owners of rail and of ports. What you find is that there isn't interoperability, but also for users, there has been a dramatic escalation of tariffs, while at the same time a deterioration in the network. And that's why we see the existence of the Transport Economic Regulator being very important, because we want to have an independent body that will be determining rail tariffs in an independent and transparent manner, so that all interested and affected parties would be able to participate. We do want to use this system to actively promote localization and industrialization, and I see that my colleague, Minister Tao, will be speaking after me. And I think we're very much in support of processes that would enable us to save the steel production in our country and to make sure that we can revert once again to the manufacture of steel rails. We're also committed to broad-based Black economic empowerment and gender equality. And in the process of the development of the PSPs in the rail and port sectors, we would be supporting SMEs and SMMEs. Now, I think that it's important to share with you that to make sure that that this whole process moves in a very effective manner, we are also setting up a private sector participation unit under the auspices of the Development Bank. And our department is in the process of concluding a memorandum of understanding with the DBSA and National Treasury to appoint the DBSA as the agent for hosting this unit. And already we have an interim PSP unit that is made up with a team with extensive knowledge and experience in structuring of PSP contracts and procurement. And what you would, I mean, I was listening to a little bit of the previous input, and I suppose the question that we're all concerned about is, once we engage in these PSP projects, what will be the length of time until we reach financial close, and will we indeed be able to reach financial close? And this is why, having learned from some of the experiences in the energy sector, we're actually setting up this PSP unit so that there should be a situation where there is support for this process. So I really want to encourage those of you who are interested to go online. There's an 8-week participatory process with regard to the RFI, where you can ask questions and you can interact with the team. And then after that, submit proposals that will be handled in a confidential manner. And we are going to be using those proposals so that we are able to shape, together with Transnet, the RFPs that we put out in August. I think we've learned that sometimes RFPs are not responsive, and the reason is that they are not adequately shaped in terms of market appetite. So I think that we are trying to create an overall environment that would allow for this participation. And Transnet itself has already, on the 1st of October last year, appointed the infrastructure manager. And it's intended that the Transnet Rail Infrastructure Manager will operate independently from Transnet Freight Rail. So Transnet will remain a freight provider, but they obviously, in due course, when there are other third-party providers, will need to be able to compete in terms of efficiency with the other providers. And it is our intention that TRIM should become fully operational as a separate operating division within Transnet by the new financial year. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is our hope that by attracting new investment into the Transnet network and allowing third-party access, we will be able to reach government's target for the sector of moving 250 million tons of freight and more by 2030. But obviously, what we understand is that achieving such an ambitious target can only be done in collaboration with those who are existing operators and would-be operators. And therefore, we really welcome the opportunity here today to take some questions and to engage with yourselves on issues relating to rail reform, because we are firmly of the view that only by working together will we be able to achieve these ambitious objectives. Chair, let me pause there, and then we can take questions.
Honourable Minister, thank you very much for your address and for sharing with us where we are in terms of progress. You know, it's incredible to think that it was in 2022 when the National Rail Policy was approved by Cabinet, and just how far we have actually come in that period from 2022 until now. It's the most important thing is, in our view, is to do this right so that we can achieve sustainable investment into the sector. To push it through on a basis that it gets done, but doesn't translate to sustainable investment, is not, of course, in the interests of anybody. And really, investment is going to be the ultimate marker of success. A question from me: the challenge, of course, that we have at the moment, as you pointed out, is that we have a railway network infrastructure which is in poor condition. And we have third-party access, which has been released through the network statement, and we are hoping to see investment into additional train capacity for South Africa. New trains are, unfortunately, of course, are very, very expensive assets. A 100-wagon coal train, for example, is a 600 million rand investment. Each locomotive costs approximately $4 million. And South Africa needs about $75 million of locomotives and wagons to achieve that freight delta of about 90 million tons between Transnet's run rate and the 250 million tons. How do we solve in your view, how do we solve the problem in the intervening period? Because, to wait for train investments for the infrastructure to be sorted out through the RFI processes in years to come would be a bit of a shame, because we would only see train investments happening then. How do we accelerate that now? Because one of the issues with the network statement is that the service level commitments aren't embedded within the rail access agreement, And the reason for that has been stated is because of the condition of the infrastructure. Do you think we can have an interim step where instead of committing to a level of service which is what the system was designed for, we can get to a position where we have service level commitments based on what is reasonable given the condition of the infrastructure at the time, so that the rolling stock investors can build their business cases with a degree of certainty now, based on the level of infrastructure now, with certainly the hope that it would improve, but at least certainty on the level of service commitment which it is now, to enable that certainty to make those investments. Do you think that there's scope for that as an intervening step?
Look, I think the first thing that one wants to say is that Transnet itself is planning to put in applications to National Treasury's budget facility for infrastructure to improve infrastructure in the priority corridors. So while we are opening up the possibility of third-party investment in the rail infrastructure, we are not giving up on Transnet investment in the condition of the rail. And you would know that there are already the multilateral cooperation agreements which allow particular companies that have agreements with Transnet to invest in infrastructure. So I think that I think it's important to make that point, but at the same time to say to you that we are already in discussion with yourselves as the sector on a future network statement and future rules and regulations around that future network statement. So I think that it's very important in the public participation processes that are going on around that the questions that you are raising are raised. Because we do understand that third-party operators need some level of comfort. I think the whole reason why I'm in a rush to permanently appoint the Transport Economic Regulator is we want to make sure that there's an independent body that is going to be controlling the rules around third-party access. Because obviously we understand that Transnet can't be a referee and a player. So we want to make sure that there's an independent referee. And I think that there are enough consultation processes happening around that the concerns and the interests of industry can be raised in those processes. I think the other thing that one would want to say is that both Transnet and PRASA are interested in setting up rolling stock companies. And I think that this is an area that for future development. But there's nothing that prevents any of you from having a look at the RFIs and also making recommendations through that process, because I think that process is really intended not only to deal with longer term investment in the rail infrastructure, but it's also to address the question of what do we do in the short term. And, you know, I think what we say as the department and what Transnet says is that we're prepared to do anything legal that is within the current regulatory environment. And there's lots of scope there. Maybe, Chair, you can facilitate. I see there's some hands, there's some things in the chat which I'm having difficulty accessing. Maybe you could just take, because I'm mindful that it's 17 minutes past 12. Maybe you could just rattle off a few more questions and one can try and do another round of answering before 12:30 when I believe the session ends.
Minister, thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. If I could, Harry, if I can hand over to you, please, to facilitate the process of asking, of transmitting the questions to the minister, so she can address them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got Andrew Pikes, whose hand is up for quite some while. Andrew, can you unmute yourself and briefly ask your question? Keep it short, please.
Thanks, Harry. Good afternoon, Minister, and thank you very much. Your RFI is a very interesting document and looks as if it has lots of interesting scope. My question is around the PSP unit. Would you mind clarifying exactly what the mandate of that unit is? Will it have any powers as such? And if so, what are those powers and where does it derive those powers from? I'm sure the other questions I have in mind will be asked anyway. Thank you, Minister.
Chair, do you want to take some more questions and then I'll answer one time?
Yes, Minister. The next one here is from Winston Harris. He's asking, it's noted Minister Chris stated that ownership will remain with state before and after concessionaire option. Could it be elaborated with which level of state? So I'm just scanning through the questions quickly. So the next question is from Ronnie Govender. He's asking, apologies. How can EME companies with relevant experience engage and participate in opportunities within your department?
Sorry, what kind of companies?
EME, Echo Mike Echo. I'm not too sure what it is. Maybe Veronica can brief us on EME.
EME, small, medium enterprise
Oh,
companies.
okay. Thank you.
SME.
Thank you,
SME.
Minister.
Yeah, I see Howard has already answered some of the questions here. So, Minister, we can stand there. I think there was one question from Charles Day asking what programs of training are being implemented for Transnet employees to operate in a privatized rail port environment. As far as I can see, that's the questions we have. So, Minister, you're on mute.
Sorry, Warwick Lord has got his hand up.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Harry. Minister, the question is to you just with regard to this new and exciting dispensation you opened up on Sunday last week. You're asking for private sector to hand over, or not hand over, but discuss with you and share with you a lot of the intellectual property. Now, these are often areas that are quite secretive to the individual companies that use them, and there is no process described in the PSP documents with regards to how we would then go forward. It's purely share the information with us. Always obviously a concern with entities that have been working with us for a number of decades and a significant amount of costs have been put into it. How are we going to sort of cover that concern or that worry so that we do get meaningful participation? Thank you.
Chair, with your permission, I'll have a stab. So the first question was about the PSP unit. And I think that this unit is primarily intended to be facilitative. Obviously, we need to be setting up a clear rules-based framework for what we would want to establish. Because I've already explained, for example, that infrastructure would remain state-owned, and we want to facilitate involvement of micro enterprises. We support broad-based Black economic empowerment. We've recently set up a work stream with organized labor. So I think that the PSP unit will be establishing rules for the process. And obviously the policy department, which is ourselves, would be working with the PSP unit. If there had to be rules that needed to be gazetted, then obviously that would be the function of the policy unit, not the function of the PSP. But I think that the key thing that we're trying to do with the PSP unit is to make sure that these deals are going to reach financial close. Because what we've learned from the, as I was saying, the independent power producers is that, I don't know whether it would be fair to say the majority, but let me say a large number of those bid windows were not, didn't result in additional generation. And we don't want a situation where we put out requests for participation and then we don't actually reach financial close. When we talk about state ownership, we're talking about the rail would remain owned, the Transnet network would remain owned by Transnet, and the PRASA network would remain owned by PRASA. So it's ownership at national government level. That is because rail is a national government competence. There can be concessions. We know that there's both provincial and municipal governments that are interested in concessions on passenger rail, and that is something that can be considered. Because the next RFI that we are going to put out is on passenger rail. With regard to SMEs, obviously, when the actual bid documents are put out, part of what we would then be looking at is what would be the arrangements in terms of supplier development and also in terms of subcontracting. And you would know that there are National Treasury regulations that control this. So we're just making the point that the future bids that would be the future requests for proposals that would be put out by Transnet would be in the context of the broader National Treasury regulations that we are expecting to get in the not too distant future. Transnet has training programs for its own employees. I don't think it's Transnet's role to be training its employees for the private sector. Transnet would train its employees for Transnet. And Transnet will still, TPT, Transnet Port Terminals, will still operate port terminals. And TFROC, Transnet Freight, will still operate freight operations with their own employees. I think the confidentiality issue is a big issue. We do say that it will be confidential, but I think that you know that's a broad category, but we would need to be talking specifics. And you would obviously, because there's this 8 weeks where it's interactive, I think that you would then be able to ask about specific things, how the confidentiality and intellectual property would be dealt with. If you have to understand what are we trying to do, we're trying to make sure that the bids, that the requests for proposal that Transnet puts out are market sensitive. Because we have had situations where Transnet has put out bids before that have been non-responsive. So we're not trying to find out your secrets. We're trying to understand where appetite lies, and so that we can shape the requests for proposals in an appropriate manner. So we're not asking for information so that we can steal your trade secrets. We don't need your trade secrets, but you've got to tell us enough so that you feel that the way in which future requests for proposals are couched meets where you think the appetite lies. Chair, I've answered the questions to the best of my ability. It's almost 12:30. So maybe we should then agree that there will be, first of all, there's a lot of interactive, we've set up the RFIs on an interactive basis for 8 weeks. So I think that people who are interested should go into the website and should interact. I think that's quite important. Secondly, I can see that there is appetite from operators to understand more. And I think a lot of the questions you would want to ask are quite technical questions. So I want to suggest that you could write me an email and you could request an interaction with our officials in our department so that a range of technical questions could be answered. And we could do an online forum like this where the Deputy Director General Rail and his officials, and we could also bring the interim regulator and the colleagues from the PSP unit, and then there could be more discussion on a technical level, which I think would be helpful to yourselves. I don't know whether that's a good suggestion, Chair, given that our mutual time limitations in terms of a way forward.
Honourable Minister, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and certainly one that I think that ARIA would love to take you up on. And ARIA, of course, knows the rail sector desk well and will engage on that. So thank you very much. We really appreciate that opportunity to have a more technical session. I think it's a brilliant idea. I'd also just like a quick comment from me, is that the RFI process really makes a huge amount of sense, as you've said, to enable the sculpting of these really critical projects on a basis that results in financial close, which is really the definition of success. So hugely supported and really well thought through. So something that I think the association does absolutely welcome. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. I'd just like to hand over to Ms. Nhlapo quickly, who'd like to say a couple of words.
Minister, we are led by powerful women in this industry. And our message to you from one woman to another is that it is both a privilege and a profound responsibility to stand before you today as we gather, not just as an industry, but as custodians of a vision where rail is the backbone of our economy, where transformation is real, and where progress is shared by all. This year's theme, Phakama Railways, is more than a call to rise. It is an invitation to rebuild, reimagine, reclaim the promise of our railways. It is a reminder that the power to shape this industry lies in our hands and the hands of those who know its heartbeat, who believe in its potential, who are ready to work together for its revival. Minister, this is a new era of collaboration. Rail reform is not about replacing one system with another. It is about partnership. It is about government and the private sector working side by side, not as competitors, but as collaborators in growing our economy. It is about ensuring that localization is not just policy, but practice, because our railways must be built by our people. It is about embedding broad-based Black economic empowerment into the very fabric of our industry. Because true transformation, Minister, is not optional. It is essential. The African Rail Industry Association stands at the heart of this mission. We are not here to take sides. We are here to build bridges. Ours is the only platform where the state, private sector can come together to design a future that works for all. Comrade Minister, a call to unity. Umkhombandlela uthi, to those who share this vision, we say, join us. This is the year of active participation, where every voice matters, where every contribution counts. Whether you are a manufacturer, an operator, an engineer, or an entrepreneur, this is your industry and your leadership is needed. And to those who may doubt or who resist progress, we extend a hand. The time for division is over. The challenges we face, infrastructure constraints, inefficiencies, missed opportunities, are too great for any one group to solve alone. But together, we can move mountains. Our marriage, Minister, is not that of convenience, but the marriage between government and private sector is that of necessity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for the incredible progress that has been made in a short period of time.
Thank you.
If we can then move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the presentation from the DTIC. I believe that unfortunately the Minister Parks-Tau was unable to join us today. So there will be representation now from the DTIC. He will be putting forward the process around localization and the focus on developing and stimulating the downstream rail industry in South Africa. If I can, Harry, then hand over, please, to the representatives from the DTIC.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Where is that video story?
Good afternoon. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we can hear you.
just
Thank you.
Can you all see me?
No, we can't see you yet.
I don't know.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Can somebody say, okay, you can see me? Because it says Major Komani, the video. The operator, can you see me?
No, we can't see you. We can, no, the camera is not
It's
operational.
okay, let's not waste time. I don't know, the operator will figure it out. But anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Major Komani. I am the Director for Rail Transport Equipment Sector Desk at the DTIC. As you know, the DTIC is very big. We have colleagues from export that coordinate the work on export councils. And we have got colleagues that deals with trade and investment. And then we have got colleagues also that deals with funding. And I hope one day we will have an opportunity to have both units of the DTIC coming to share with yourselves exactly how we are trying to deliver on the government's mandate. But over and above that, we have explained to Marcella the challenge that we are faced with in the DTIC. There are issues in the steel industry. The issue of AMSA is keeping the management very busy, amongst other things. So we agreed that at the appropriate time, we will get the minister and the deputy minister, if possible, to come and really brief the rail industry in terms of where the DTIC is focusing and how we can collaborate. But before I get into the work that we are doing, I'm here with Lungiswa. If I can't share some of the points, I think Lungiswa will be able to come in. But in terms of the work on the localization, driving this work of localization under the reindustrialization program. If you remember, there was a time when the DTIC had an industrial policy action plan. We used to call that document an IPEP. Then there was an era where under Minister Patel, we had the rail sector was earmarked as one of the sector that has potential to assist in creating the job and grow the economy, in particular the export that we so much need. But I want to take you back to 2011, 2012, when the designation work started. The designation work through legislation was in 2011, 2012, through the PFMA and its regulation. You remember the regulation then, and with threshold designate, which assisted Transnet, if you remember, during the 1064 locomotive program, and the PRASA's current PRASA is being implemented together with Transnet. We have had some positive results through the designation, and then we also lost some opportunities through the designation work. And as you are aware, in 2022, there was a constitutional court ruling that repealed the designations. So I want you to understand that as we're speaking today, there is no formal legislation that compel the state-owned company, meaning your Transnet, your PRASA, to code local content threshold. But what we have managed to do with the colleagues in Transnet and PRASA, we have sort of agreed to sort of say, let's try to not lose the momentum on localization, but also sustain what we are already having. And you have seen that from time to time when Transnet issue a tender, they will call for local content. So the DTIC, despite the repealing of the localization designation instruction note, is still working with the state-owned companies to make sure that we maintain some level of local content. And by so doing, we have been able to preserve some of the companies. So, you know, during some companies in the rail sector were working on short notice, some were closed, some faced a lot of financial challenges. But the work that we tried to do was sort of preserve what we had. So I looked at the numbers when I got the invitation from I looked at what the sector has been doing. If you look at the work that we have been doing collectively as a country on import and export, you can say that as you compared with the steel industry, you know, global overcapacity of steel, China. But I looked at the data. Last year, South Africa, we imported over 2.5 billion rand, but we managed as a country to export 2 billion rand. And then when I saw the theme, I felt that maybe we can have a discussion to sort of say, under Chapter 86, where we report trade on goods under rail, what more work can we do together to increase our footprint? Because I looked at the countries that we are exporting to. We are exporting to the likes of Netherlands, Mozambique, USA, UK, and other African countries. So what it means is that South African industry is able to meet some of the onerous requirements when you do the export. So it also shows that if we put more resources from government, then more exports can be achieved. It also shows that if the work that Minister Chrissy touched on, that the SOC are doing, if it's implemented, and then we can have more local activities which will provide a springboard for our manufacturers. So we noted some positive inputs just on trade on that. But one thing that I want Marcella and team and everybody on the line is to be cognizant of, we need to do more on parts. South Africa is importing a lot of parts that goes into the rail sector. So we need to work with our universities, we need to work with our SOCs to make sure that we approve more parts that we can localize. So we need to start thinking about localizing more parts, but not all parts, because there are certain parts that the OEMs will remain in their countries. They can't come to South Africa because of IP, because of the volume requirements, but we need to identify opportunities within the parts subsector in terms of what we can do and take forward. But while we are talking about localization and industrialization at the DTIC, I want to bring to your attention that because of the importance of the steel industry in the rail sector, the minister, I think when he comes to engage with yourself, he will be able to give you feedback in terms of the work that he has managed to do with the steel industry. But one thing that I can just report on is that on the 1st of March, he had an EOC, an executive oversight committee with the steel industry. And amongst other things that they discussed, Marcella was there. The industry raised a number of issues to the minister, which included logistics and transport cost. So we are very aware that the cost of transport in South Africa remains high, and it leads to a higher input cost in the finished products that we export. It's something that we need to tackle. And also the local procurement policies that I will be touching on in details. And there was also another issue on the cost of production, like energy. My colleagues in the DTIC are working with Eskom on the TDP. I think you're all aware of the TDP program that Eskom is going to be implementing. And there's also a lot of work around the export. If there is a colleague from the DTIC here, they will touch, especially on the AFCTA. You know, South Africa has started trading on the AFCTA since 2024 in January. So we want to see more activities around that, because we believe because of the distance, we can be able to reach the African market quicker. But there are still issues, I believe, at the ports of entry. Those are the things that needs to be addressed. But we are working also with SARS to make sure that we alleviate some of the challenges. But the key issue that is facing the sector, the steel industry, which also impact the rail industry, is high imports that are coming into the country. And then just on that, I think you have seen last year, Trade Commission has been out gathering inputs from industry to sort of say we are increasing a duty, or we are removing a rebate, or we are doing this. Please, when you see such type of request for inputs, respond. I know there was one by ArcelorMittal on the rebate facility. If you have not seen it, please send me an email so that we can give you the opportunity through ITech to give inputs on how that is going to affect you. Okay, back to the localization. So on the localization, now that you know that the designation instruction notes are being repealed, we now have a Public Procurement Act of 2024. I believe all of you are familiar with the Act. And in terms of the Act, Chapter 4 of the Act deals with the preferential procurement. And of that Chapter 4, Section 20 deals with the designation of the sector. So we're going to have to designate the sector like we have done, but differently. This time, we need to agree as an industry. What are the products that South Africa has got a competitive advantage or the manufacturing capacity and capability to manufacture, so that when Transnet and PRASA and any other companies in South Africa that are subjected to the PFMA are procuring, can then apply that instruction note or a practice note. I think we can agree that through things that can be achieved. And then also there are other areas in the legislation, if not properly done, you can have negative consequences. We are learning from other countries that are implementing buy local. We are following, we are learning, and then we try to optimize our process to make sure that if there is any legislation that is going to be created for the rail sector, it must not create an administrative burden on the suppliers and even the SOCs. So we're going to have to do it in such a way that we are aligned and we minimize past those who have been participating in the designation. There was a back and forth on the request for exemptions. So help us when we do this designation, we don't deal with the request for exemption. And then the designation process, as it has always been said, we are trying to support and protect our local manufacturing capacity. It's not a solution for all of our industry problems, but we believe through this policy, we can then be able to sustain our manufacturing industry. So in terms of yourself to give inputs, come next week, which is the beginning of the new financial year, we want to finalize the engagement. We want yourself to give us your final threshold that must be a specific product. When we go through the normal gazetting process, we don't have a lot of questions and answers to provide, because that can delay the whole process. You remember during 2011, 2012, we did not have to go through the gazetting process. In this act, the Public Procurement Act, the Minister of Trade and Industry must issue in a gazette the threshold that will be designated. And once that is issued, it must go out for 30 days for industry to give inputs. And after that 30 days has lapsed, the DTIC must consider all the questions of clarity and provide answers, and then update the threshold before it can be presented to the minister for signature. And once the minister has signed it, it will then go to National Treasury. So we want yourselves to assist us in getting this process done, so that when we are at that phase of gazetting, we don't have to deal with a lot of questions of clarity. I would like to leave the designation process there, but I want to touch on some of the things that the DTIC is doing just to support localization. And I think you are all aware of the funding that is at the IDC, the downstream funding, the steel downstream funding. If you have not had an opportunity to apply, please do so. I know one of the minimum requirements is level 4. If you don't have level 4, you just need to demonstrate how you're going to achieve your level 4. This is a fund. I think it was a 1.5 billion rand fund to assist manufacturers. Please take advantage of this. It's a loan facility. You need to apply so that you can then lower your cost of production. But over and above that, I want to thank industry for the work that we are doing collectively with yourselves. And I want to also re-emphasize that localization is one of the key lever that the DTIC is going to use to achieve our industrialization objective. And I also want to confirm that the DTIC is working with the Department of Transport. We are participating in the private sector participation program that Minister Grisi has touched on. We are also participating in the steering committee of the Department of Transport to make sure there is policy alignment, and we are doing that to make sure that the industry that we are having, the railway sector, is protected, and also the work that other industries like your steel sector, the aluminum sector, and the copper, because you still get material from those subsectors, are also being supported. And then, Lungiswa, I don't know if you want to add on the work that we are doing. Lungi? Through you, Chair.
Lungi, please carry on. Thank you.
Okay, so if Lungiswa is not having any... Okay,
yes,
come Lungi.
You can continue, Major. I think you've covered everything. Thank you.
Yes. I think the other thing that I would like to ask your assistance on is on the, if as a sector we are not able to forever be complaining that our manufacturing industry is being eroded by the imports. There are imports that are needed, but there are certain imports really the country. It must be imports that ask ourselves is, what do we have standards that needs to be updated? And whether the ARIA has ever had an opportunity to engage SABS or the rail safety regulator, so that we can collectively look into how we can use standards to root out unnecessary imports. If we have not done so, I want us in the next meeting to call those colleagues at SABS, the colleagues at rail safety regulator, so that we can have a conversation around standards and learn from other countries how they have used the standards to root out imports, and also to preserve manufacturing capacity. We can then be able to innovate as a sector, and we can then maybe be able to build capacity to export products of higher value outside the country. So I want to stop there.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I think a couple of takeaways there is the commitment of the DTIC to the consultation process and receiving inputs from industry in order to ensure that the policy is properly crafted. And if I can just encourage our colleagues to really engage robustly and take up that invitation on that, so that we can we can assist the DTIC in this important process. The next thing also to note is you mentioned that the IDC funding is an element where we can look to stimulate growth in the downstream services and manufacturing economy. That's absolutely really encouraging, because I think very often it's that access to funding that limits services companies and manufacturers from investing in latest technologies for testing or for manufacturing, which again is something that members and industry participants should really take up. Just a question, Mecha, is the CSIR can play an important role, I think, in the industry as well, in assisting
yes.
the CSIR, yes, in assisting our industry participants in identifying areas where components can be reverse engineered, for example, for successful manufacture in South Africa. Is it worth having engagements with the CSIR as well on those?
Yes. Yes, actually, I forgot. Really, it's my fault. The CSIR colleagues remain a key partner for the DTIC. There is a program of the National Foundry Technology Network that is hosted by the CSIR on behalf of the DTIC. There you found companies in the foundry, majority of them in the foundry. There are companies that have benefited through this program that are supplying to the likes of Transnet, majority of them. So there is a program. It assists companies in the foundry with optimizing their production process, responding to the environmental issues, and a number of things. But there is also a colleague in CSIR that is helping, I know, on commercialization of products. So if there is a company within manufacturing sector that is struggling with getting their processes right, send an email to Lungiswa or myself, and we then network you with that colleague at CSIR. They've been very helpful in the aluminium sector. There are a lot of companies that have benefited through the CSIR work program. So we would like to see more companies also in the rail sector. Remember, Transnet also has got a research unit at CSIR at CSIR there. During the TAL, we worked a lot. When Transnet was doing the TAL locomotive, I remember I've been there a lot on the TAL locomotive. There's still more work that we can do. I think what they were requesting at some point was sort of saying, how can the DTIC assist in fast-tracking the design and commercialization, the money? They were talking about the money. That point still needs to be revisited to see what else can be done. But maybe to take advantage of this, there is a NIP program. I don't know if colleagues are familiar of the National Industrial Participation. Please don't stop me.
No, don't worry, carry on.
Yes, I'm hearing a message that says colleague has stopped. There is a National Industrial Participation Program that the DTIC is running. In this program, the original equipment manufacturers like your WebTech and others would have commitment obligations to the DTIC, and there are companies in the rail sector that are already benefiting through the National Industrialization Participation Program. One of the key objectives of this program was a technology transfer and project on export. The colleagues in Dr. Makube's office that are responsible for the National Industrialization Participation Program to sort of help us understand where the opportunities are as we are speaking. I know of 2 companies in the rail sector that have benefited and are benefiting in this program. I think more can be done, especially now that we are talking about export-led industrialization. If we have products that we can sell and we need assistance, let's tap into that resource. It's not physical money, it's assistance, it's technical assistance that can be provided to a manufacturer. So it's not physical money like IDC, like NEF. It's assistance that can be provided to a manufacturer to do what they do best. That was just on the NEP program. Thanks, and then please continue.
Mecha, thank you. Thank you for that. And you know, I think the message is very clear to the industry that there are existing programs, there are arms of government like the CSIR, like the IDC, that are there to stimulate our industry, to support the industry, and to really get the industry to where we can take it. So, you know, thank you so much for highlighting all of these points, and I hope it's very well heard, and that our industry does take you up on this offer of engagement. It's such a critical thing as we go on this journey, and you know, the power of trust in the operator-supplier relationship is such an incredible element of the success of a business. And trust in a local supplier is so much easier to generate than trust in a supplier that's 2,000 or 20,000 kilometers away. It really is a powerful element of making our industry stronger. So, you know, thank you very much for that commitment. The other thing is that I would just like to say is that I'd like to thank the DTIC. I'd like to thank you, Mecha. I'd like to thank Lungi for the incredible support that the DTIC gives for ARIA. And has done for so many years. It really is a critical part of enabling ARIA to succeed in the delivery of its mandate. So really sincerely thank you for commitment, both in terms of funding for the association, as well as your time that you give to the association in the DTIC by participating in the board. It's really something that we really sincerely appreciate very, very much. I think that takes us to just after 1 o'clock, which is our closing time.
Maybe if 1 minute.
No problem.
One point, please.
Mecha, if you can just speak closer to the microphone, please.
1 minute, as I believe. Can I?
Yes, you
Mecha, sorry, your line is breaking up, and we're battling to hear you. But let's give it another go.
I think there's another element of such as we go ahead with the work.
Yes,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I was saying on skills development. It's okay.
Oh, Mecha, I think we've lost you again.
It's fine. I will post it to Marcella.
Okay. Super, Mecha. Thank you very much. And thank you sincerely for your time today. We really, really appreciate it. So I think that brings us to the end of the agenda for today. I think it was an incredibly engaging session from all of the presenters, as the AGMs always are. Thank you for your participation. We really sincerely appreciate it. And if I can just make one big call out to the industry, it's engage actively with government in this process. We are busy with the transformational process of reform in the industry, engage with government, and really give thorough and honest feedback to government so that we can enable the crafting of effective reforms that result in investment into our sector. Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your time and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.